There is a particular kind of disgust that lives in the chest, not the stomach. You know the one. It rises when you see a colleague perform humility at a meeting. All that theatrical self-deprecation, the practiced pause before accepting a compliment, and something in you tightens like a fist. Or it's the person at the dinner party who narrates their own suffering so elegantly that you realize they've rehearsed it, that their wound has become a performance, and you feel something close to contempt. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just watching someone be loud and needy and desperate for attention in a room, and the feeling that moves through you isn't pity, it's fury. A quiet, embarrassed, specific fury. And here is the thing nobody tells you about that fury. Here is the thing that costs something to say. That disgust is not a judgment about them. It is a map of you. This is not a comfortable idea. I am not offering it comfortably. I have sat with this long enough to know that when I tell you the things you most despise in other people are the things you carry unacknowledged inside yourself, your first instinct will be to argue, and your argument will be reasonable. Your argument will be, but no, I genuinely dislike dishonesty, I genuinely dislike arrogance, I genuinely dislike self-pity, and those are legitimate ethical positions, not repressed aspects of my character. And I want to sit with that argument seriously, because it deserves to be taken seriously, before I show you why it doesn't quite hold. But first, let me tell you about a woman named Priya. Priya is 34 years old and works as a brand strategist in a city she moved to specifically to escape the city she grew up in, which is a thing people do more than they admit, running away and calling it ambition. She is brilliant at her job, and she knows it, but she talks about her brilliance in a very particular register, always undercut, always qualified, always framed as luck or timing or team effort, never claimed directly as hers. She has a specific and burning hatred, I use that word deliberately, for what she calls people who hype themselves up. Her Instagram feed is a private theater of eye rolls. A peer posts about their promotion, and something acidic moves through her. A former colleague writes about their entrepreneurial journey in language that Priya calls performative, and she spends 20 minutes forensically explaining to her partner why the post is fraudulent. Her partner, who loves her, nods. But what he has started to notice over the years is that Priya's contempt for self-promoters arrives most reliably on the days when Priya herself has been overlooked, when the credit went sideways, when someone younger got the room's attention. The contempt is not a character assessment. Contempt is a thermometer. What Priya hates in others is precisely what she cannot permit herself. The direct claiming of her own worth. The unqualified assertion, I did this, I am good at this, I want recognition for this. These feel, to Priya, like moral failures, arrogance, vanity. The specific sins she was taught, explicitly or by atmosphere, were unacceptable in a woman from her background, in a household where ambition was supposed to be invisible, where the most you could do was to let your achievements speak, while you stood beside them looking almost apologetic. She didn't bury this need. She didn't dissolve it. She did what humans do with the parts of themselves they cannot accept. She outsourced the hatred of it. She found it in others and punished it there. Which is more comfortable than punishing it in yourself, because in others you can maintain the high ground. Carl Jung called this the shadow, not the villain shadow of pop psychology, not the dark urges and violent impulses, though those exist too. The shadow is more precise and more devastating than that. It is the repository of everything you've decided you are not. Everything that was exiled from your self-concept. The neediness, the ambition, the capacity for cruelty, the desire for attention, the smallness, the grandiosity, doesn't dissolve when you exile it. It goes underground and lives in the basement of your nervous system, and from there, it runs a parallel operation. It selects, from the infinite noise of human behavior you witness every day, the specific frequencies that match what you've buried, and it amplifies them. It makes you hypersensitive to them. It makes them feel intolerable. The intensity of your reaction is not evidence of your discernment. It is evidence of your disowned depth. The things that bother you mildly are usually just things you dislike. The things that bother you in your body, that make you want to leave the room or deliver a verdict or write a paragraph, about why this particular person is fundamentally fraudulent, those things are yours. They are yours, and you have refused them. This is Jungian psychology at its most useful and most uncomfortable. And I want to be careful here not to make it a clever parlor trick, because people do turn it into one. They use it as a way to pathologize their own judgment, to second-guess every critical thought, to become so obsessed with their inner architecture that they stop functioning as ethical agents in the world. That is a real misuse of the idea. And so the counter-argument deserves air. The counter-argument is this: not every strong reaction is projection. Some people really are dishonest. Some behavior really is manipulative. Real ethical discernment exists, and a framework that tells you that every time you notice wrongdoing, you're really just looking at your own reflection doesn't produce clarity. It produces paralysis, and, in more dangerous contexts, it silences people who should speak. This is true. I believe it, and it doesn't dismantle the core proposition. The distinction that matters is this: projection is not about the thing you see, it is about the charge the thing carries. When you observe genuine dishonesty in someone, you can name it, note it, decide to limit your trust, and then move on. The observation is proportionate to the behavior. Projection is what happens when the reaction is disproportionate, when you cannot let it go, when you find yourself composing the indictment 3 days later in the shower, when the specific quality in someone else keeps appearing in your life, in different people, as if by magnetic pull, because you are selecting for it, because it is the unfinished business your nervous system keeps trying to resolve from the outside. There is a difference between noticing that someone is loud and finding someone's loudness unbearable in a way that survives the room they were in. The unbearable part is the signal. My friend Reza has spent the better part of a decade frustrated by people he describes as performatively vulnerable. Therapists, poets, men in men's groups who talk about their feelings in a language that Reza calls borrowed. He is not wrong that there is a phenomenon here. There is a certain kind of emotional literacy that has become aesthetic, that gets performed rather than practiced, that arrives at healing as a brand identity. Reza sees this clearly, and his critique is intelligent. But what Reza cannot see, what he is not yet ready to see, and I say this as someone who has watched this man drink to avoid the conversation his body keeps trying to start with him, is that behind the critique is a yearning so old and so heavily armored that it no longer feels like a yearning. It feels like a moral position. Reza was raised in a household where the emotional spectrum available to men ran from taciturn to silent. Grief was a scheduling problem. Tenderness was embarrassing. He moved through his 20s assembling an identity around competence and control, and a very specific kind of contempt for what he called navel-gazing. And somewhere in there, his own interiority got classified as the enemy. Now every man who names his feelings without apologizing for them sets off an alarm in Reza's body. Not because they're fraudulent, because they're doing the thing Reza cannot. The mechanism is not mysterious once you see it. Psychologists who study moral outrage have found, in study after study, that the behaviors people condemn most intensely are often those they themselves are tempted toward, behaviors they work hard to suppress. Nathaniel Hawthorne understood this intuitively 2 centuries before the research existed. The Scarlet Letter is, at its core, a document about how the people most committed to punishing sin are often the ones most intimately acquainted with it, not as hypocrisy, exactly, as compulsion, as the shadow's own gravity. The preacher who rails most viciously against lust is not usually doing so from a position of freedom from it. He is doing so from a position of terror at it. His sermon is a cage he is building around himself. His contempt for the congregation's weakness is the contempt he cannot afford to turn on himself. And here is where it gets harder to hear, because you are not Reza, you are not Priya, you are not the preacher. You are the person watching this with a developing sense of your own exception. The particular things you hate in other people, maybe it's mediocrity, maybe it's victimhood, maybe it's entitlement, maybe it's the way some people shrink themselves to please a room, feel to you like legitimate assessments, not projections, because you have evidence, you have reasoning, you can build the case, but that's exactly what the mechanism requires. The shadow doesn't operate by making you irrational. It operates by giving your projections the costume of discernment. It lets them walk in wearing the badge of your values. Your contempt for self-pity feels like strength. Your rage at entitlement feels like justice. Your disdain for mediocrity feels like standards. These are not disguises you chose. They are the shape repression naturally takes, because they are adjacent to real virtues, which is what makes them so difficult to locate. There was a woman named Etty Hillesum, a young Dutch Jewish woman who kept a diary from 1941 until she was deported to Auschwitz in 1943, where she died at 29. I bring her here not as inspiration. She would have been contemptuous of being used as inspiration, but because her diaries contain one of the most rigorous and terrifying acts of interior honesty I have encountered in literature. Hillesum, surrounded by annihilation, by the machinery of a hatred so vast it became bureaucratic, spent her final years not looking outward for the source of evil, nor flinching from looking inward. She wrote about the rage she found in herself, the jealousy, the hunger for importance, the way she could feel cruelty stir in her under the right conditions. She did not use the discovery to condemn herself. She used it to understand what she was capable of, and in doing so, she understood what any human was capable of, and in doing so, she refused to construct herself as categorically different from the people who were doing monstrous things, not because she condoned them, because she understood that condemnation that doesn't include the possibility of one's own darkness is not honesty. It is armor. And armor, she understood, was the most dangerous thing she could wear in a moment that required radical openness. She wrote toward her death with a clarity that most people do not achieve in a long life of safety, and that clarity cost her everything that comfort costs. She became intimate with the things inside her that she feared, and in doing so, she became the freest person in an unfree situation. What she did is not something you are likely to do. I say that not to be cruel, but because it is statistically true and epistemically honest. The moment I pretend otherwise, I become the thing you came here to argue with. Most people, not most other people, most people, which includes you and me, will read something like this and feel the specific warmth of recognition, that peculiar intimacy of being seen, sit with it for 48 hours, and then watch someone at work, online, or at a dinner, doing the thing that makes their jaw tighten. The recognition will be gone. The mechanism will be running again at full capacity, and it will feel like judgment, not reflection, because it always feels like judgment. The mind is not trying to deceive you. The mind is trying to protect you from a meeting you've been avoiding your whole life. And here is what that meeting actually looks like, because I don't want to give you the romantic version. The romantic version is that you sit with your shadow, have a reckoning, and emerge transformed. The actual version is that you catch yourself mid-contempt, mid-eye roll, mid-internal verdict, mid-paragraph of righteous explanation to a partner who is tired of being the audience, pause, and instead of finishing the case against the other person, ask the question you rarely ask: why does this particular thing, in this particular intensity, live in me? And the answer is rarely flattering. The answer is usually some version of, because I want this and I've told myself I'm not allowed to want it, because I do this and I've told myself I'm better than this, because I am afraid of this in myself, and I've been punishing it in the world in hopes of keeping it contained. Priya, to her credit, eventually did something with this, not because she had a dramatic breakthrough, because a younger woman at her firm gave a presentation and owned it completely, stood in front of the room and said, without apology, I built this. And the surge of contempt Priya felt was, for the first time, followed by a question instead of a verdict. And the question unraveled 3 weeks of uncomfortable honesty, during which she finally admitted to herself that she desperately wanted to be able to do exactly that, to stand in a room and claim what she had made. She didn't become a different person. She started giving presentations differently. The shift was small and barely visible from the outside, and it was one of the most significant things she had done in years. But before the shift, there was no triumph. There was grief. A grief for all the rooms she'd stood in, apologizing for herself. All the quiet diminishment she'd mistaken for virtue. The contempt had been holding that grief at arm's length, and when it dissolved, just slightly, just enough, the grief moved in. That is what this process actually involves. Not awakening. Grief. And most people will not pursue something they understand, even vaguely. That will make them sad. Reza has not yet arrived at this. He may not. He is 38 and moving through the world with the competence he has always had and the numbness he has mostly stopped noticing. The people he finds most insufferable are the people who are doing the exact thing his body has wanted to do since he was a boy and couldn't. He will read something like this and feel the recognition and then the resistance, and the resistance will probably win, because it has won 38 years in a row, and the body tends toward patterns it already knows. Not because Reza is weak, because the alternative is not a revelation. The alternative is sitting in the specific and unglamorous discomfort of a grown man, confronting the long-buried wreckage of his own tenderness. It is not a montage. It is slow and strange, and has no guarantee of resolution. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz by a mechanism he spent the rest of his life trying to articulate, wrote that the last of the human freedoms, the one that cannot be stripped away even in the most total conditions of unfreedom, is the freedom to choose one's attitude toward a given set of circumstances. But he was also clear, in ways that get smoothed over in the inspirational readings of his work, that this freedom is not passive. It does not come to you. It requires a continuous and exhausting act of interior labor. It requires that you know what is in you, including the dark things, especially the dark things, because the dark things you don't know about don't disappear. They make your choices for you. The person who has never examined their capacity for cruelty does not become incapable of cruelty. They become the person who commits cruelty in the sincere belief that they are administering justice. This is where the stakes are. Not in self-optimization, not in becoming a less reactive person, a more emotionally intelligent professional, or a partner who communicates better. The stakes are in whether you move through your life as the person administering the verdicts or as the person still in the trial. The verdicts feel like power. The trial is the truth. Every time you locate the source of your discomfort exclusively in someone else's behavior, every time the problem is their arrogance, their neediness, their dishonesty, their particular and infuriating way of existing, you are electing, with that choice, to remain unknown to yourself, not unknown to others, unknown to you, which means every relationship you are in is a relationship with a partial person, which means every decision you make is made by someone who does not have full access to their own data, which means the life you are building is being built by a version of you that is missing some load-bearing information. The probability that you will do something meaningful with this is low. Research on insight and behavior change is fairly consistent. The gap between understanding something and actually reorganizing your habits around that understanding is enormous, and only a small percentage of those who reach understanding cross it. This isn't a condemnation. It's a description of what change actually costs, which is more than most of us are currently willing to pay. The understanding can live in you as a kind of companion, a voice that occasionally interrupts the verdict and asks the uncomfortable question. That is not nothing. That is actually the beginning of something, even if it never becomes the dramatic revision. But here is what doesn't go away. Here is the thing that remains whether you act on it or not. Every person whose loudness makes you want to leave the room is pointing to a permission you've never given yourself. Every colleague whose self-promotion nauseates you is living out a desire you've had to exile. Every human whose vulnerability you find pathetic is practicing the courage you've been telling yourself you don't need. They are not your problem. They are your inventory. They are the index of everything you've tried to be rid of and failed to be rid of, and they will keep appearing, in different faces, in different rooms, in different fonts on different screens, until you stop punishing them for holding what is yours. You can keep punishing them. That option is real, and it is chosen, consciously or not, by most people most of the time. You can spend the rest of your life in the clean and spacious feeling of your own justified contempt. The contempt will be intelligent. It will have evidence. It will find company among the other people who share your specific version of the unforgiven self. Or you can do the thing that doesn't feel like liberation when you begin it. The thing that feels like loss. The choice has always been yours. That's not comfort. That's the problem.